Hello? So I have done some operating system installs by now, both for Linux and Windows. This video is about my experience with it. The distro shouldn't matter as much when it comes to the general install process, but here I'll include Tuxedo OS, which is like Ubuntu but with an updated environment and manufacturer patches, Debian Linux, and Windows 11. So first, you will need to download an install image for it. Go to the website of the system and look for the downloads. Typically, you will get a .iso disk image file that will be few gigabytes in size. Sometimes you might also get a tool that prepares that operating system for the install. That is the case for Windows 11 and Fedora Linux. If you plan on actually installing it to your computer, you will need a separate drive, like a USB flash drive. Considering the file size should be between 2 to 6 gigabytes, you will need a drive with 8 gigabytes or more space. Now, simply dragging the ISO to a blank drive might not work. You will need to flash it there using a tool. On Linux and for Linux, a popular choice is Balena Etcher. First, you choose the installer file, a downloaded one or something off the web. Then you select the drive where you want to put it. Note that the drive will be formatted specifically for the OS install and any other data on it will be erased. Windows install files are maybe a bit more sophisticated. Etcher might not work there. For that there is Rufus, though it only works on Windows. For Windows 11 it even offers to bypass the higher requirements. Yeah, Windows 11 has pretty high demands to even install it. However, there is also Ventoy. You can download it and turn your USB flash into a Ventoy drive. That way you can simply put all your ISOs on there and you can boot from them. They work, Windows ones too. Well, sure, you're limited just by how much space your external storage has. You can also keep your backed up files or whatever there along with the disk images. Well, you could burn the installer onto a CD or DVD, but just use a USB or something. So, your disk is split into partitions. Some might be reserved for the system, something is for your OS, maybe one for your personal stuff. The OS to be installed has to take up a partition there has to be some room on the disk. The easy thing is to use a disk just for one install, but if you want to dual boot or for some other data to be there, you need some free space on the disk. You could replace a partition with the install, but what I found to work is removing or shrinking a partition for some unallocated space using a disk manager. I advise you to be cautious when messing with the partitions like that. When things go wrong or you erase something you shouldn't have erased, that can lead to data loss or systems breaking. Anyway, many installers that have some user friendliness detect the free space and give you the option to install it there. It might be better to just have Linux and Windows on separate disks. First, I'll quickly go over some BIOS settings. This part should be optional. So when starting up your computer and the logo appears, press the key to enter BIOS. This varies depending on the manufacturer, maybe it could be F2, delete or escape. Some features you will have depend on whether the PC is in UEFI or legacy BIOS mode, and the file system needs to be according to that. The boot sequence determines what takes priority when starting up. BIOS includes different forms of medium, like your hard drive, USB or DVD. UEFI also includes entries for each installed operating system. You can remove and reorder entries. For example, if you use your USB for OS install, you can bring it to the top so the computer would always boot into it when it is plugged and has a valid ISO flashed onto it. Something else of interest is Secure Boot. What Secure Boot does is that it makes your boot more secure by only allowing trusted and signed systems. Officially, this is a requirement for Windows 11, but some older systems might be held back by it, so decide for yourself if it should be turned on or not. There is also a TPM or Trusted Platform module. Version 2 is also required in Windows 11, so if your computer supports it, you can also turn it on. Here you can also configure other stuff about your computer, such as virtualization and access to devices. Make sure to apply the changes made. Alright, now keep your installation drive plugged in for a bit. On startup, press the key for the boot menu. This again varies by manufacturer. I am on a Dell laptop, it is F12 here, but other options include Escape, F10 and Delete. Here, select the entry for the external drive where you have your installation media. If you choose a Ventoy drive, you get a list of all the ISOs on it and you can choose between them. If you flashed an ISO to the drive, it will launch that OS directly. One quirk I found with my Ventoy installation is that it starts with a rather small screen size, so the loading screen might look a little weird, but it doesn't affect the OS itself. Speaking of, at this point you enter the installer for the system. On some Linux images, you enter a live environment, which is simply an amazing feature. You have the entire operating system running straight from the flash drive. You can use it to have a look around, see if it works for you. You do still have the access to the files to any installed systems. You can get them or do repairs here if issues show up. Normally your disk will not be affected by stuff done on the live environment, so open the installer to get it there. Installers vary in Linux. Some distros might come with their own ones with advanced steps. A common installer is Calamares, which I'm showing on a live edition of Debian. Network connection is probably good for the installations, but it's not a strict requirement. It starts off with a language selection, then select the time zone, here either from the list or the map. Then select the keyboard layout. Calamares has a replace partition option where you install the OS into a selected partition, which seems nice. You can also use it on unallocated space. Usually you would get the options to use the largest free space or format the entire disk for Linux. Then just set a profile name and password. You get a brief summary of the changes to be made and that's it. It starts installing, no further questions asked. When finishing, you can continue using the live environment and then restart your boot into the installed OS. Some live media request you to remove the drive before shutting down. This is so you don't accidentally boot into the installer again instead of the installed system. When dual booting, you are greeted with a bootloader on startup where you can choose what to boot into. It's Windows Boot Manager, Windows and Grab on Linux. While the core system with the drivers is set up and functional, it is recommended to update the software as one of the first things. Now for Windows, I show you how you install it in a virtual machine. A virtual machine is basically for running an operating system inside an operating system. It's kinda like emulating the OS, so the proper term is virtualization. Software for it include VirtualBox, VMware, GNOME boxes and KVM plus QEMU plus Word Manager. I will use VirtualBox 7.0 here. To create a new virtual machine, give it a name and locate the ISO file. You can have VirtualBox fill out some of the user data, but I will disable that here for the real Windows installing experience. Then allocate some of your memory, processing power and disk space for the machine. Windows 11 apparently requires UEFI, so that box is ticked here. Usually there's no point in that. My usual setup is 4 GB RAM, 32 GB space and 2 core processing. However, Windows 11 installs officially should have at least double the disk size. Here on Linux, an issue might occur on VirtualBox that requires you to disable KVM kernel extensions. It was like a command for a temporary fix. Another error here, guess I should have pressed any key to boot from a CD or DVD. With that out of the way, the installer launches. A reason for installing it virtually is that it's easier for me to record. In the latest major update of Windows 11, they changed up the installer interface. You can use the previous installer, so I'll go over both of them. First, set the language and locale, followed by the keyboard layout. The installer will be in Estonian because that's what I have. If there are any Estonian viewers watching, I will do my best to provide Estonian subtitles here. Here, select that you want to install Windows 11. The new installer will erase all files and you have to accept that. If you pick repair, it will go to the recovery menu. Now we'll see signs of proprietary closed software. It will get worse later. If you have a product key, enter it here to activate Windows. Select a suitable edition of Windows. I go for Pro. You have to accept your terms and license agreement. Then select a partition to install Windows 2. Here everything on the partition will be removed. You can see here I have 80 GB of unreserved space, so you can install it there too. Now it will start the installation on this blue screen that's looking right like the recovery screen. So on the screen when you choose to install it, there is a button on the bottom to use the old configuration, so to speak. Here all the localization is on one page. Here just click install now. Same thing here, product key, click you don't have it, select edition, accept agreement. Here it simply lets you upgrade Windows and keep the files, only to tell you to upgrade in the existing installation instead of in the live media. Then it just puts you back to the start. So we're again stuck with a clean install. Here again is a partition selection. If you install it over an existing Windows installation, the old installer will not erase the files. Instead it will put them away in c/windows.old folder, so you can collect them later. To use the partition solely for the new installation and do a really clean install, you can format it. Note that this now will remove all data on the partition the moment you click OK. Now it starts installing. It displays some steps like preparations and installing updates. While the new installer might be new and different looking, I find the old one to be better functioning. It will restart when that part is done. But we're not done with the setup yet, it's only beginning. Now it's doing something over there in the background. After a while it will restart into the OOBE setup, signaled by the beautiful startup sound. I may have some gripes with Windows, but the startup sounds are pretty nice. Now moving forward, it's all about configuring the user, and it's a mess. First it again asks for a region, keyboard layout, and whether you'll need a second layout. I say no to that. Then it goes and checks for updates and just does something in the background for a while again. At one point it should ask you to connect to a network, if you're on Wi-Fi, and this time it's a must. Microsoft has cracked down on ways to get around it. Here it says let loose and watch everything work like magic, which is ironic as the whole installation process isn't nearly as straightforward as what I just had on Linux. It restarts, asks you to set a display name, then restarts again. The setup differs depending on whether Windows is for personal use or it's part of some organization. So let's get personal here. Here is the most controversial part of the installer. You have to connect to a Microsoft account. One way to get around it was to open up command prompt Shift plus F10 and type OOBE/bypass in a row, but I read this method got removed by Microsoft recently. There was a funny way around it where you put in an overused email like no@thanks.com. It gave you an error message and just let you through, but this seems to be fixed as well. The current method apparently is that you type this start mscxh local only into command prompt. This will open a new window where you can set a local account. Here I just went ahead and logged in anyways. As I remember, Windows 10 lets you off with a local account, but overall the installation there is not that much better either. When creating a local account, you have to set a password in the standard way and then set 3 security questions, like the name of a pet or the city of origin. What kind of requirement is that? When logging in with the MS account, it suggests you set a numerical PIN instead of an entire password. Now a bunch of questions regarding data collection. Even if you say no to everything here, it doesn't disable data collection, only the additional parts of it. Now a loading splash screen. Previously it was like a black and blue blur, I prefer that. Here you're intended to tick all the things you're gonna use the computer for. Also, it maybe looks a little off without the blur effects. And of course, after that, Microsoft advertises their services right there in the installer. Connecting to your phone, OneDrive, Microsoft Edge, and lastly Office 365, which you have to say no to 3 times. For OneDrive, select Don't Backup for reasons. Speaking from experience, with OneDrive you have this thing constantly downloading and uploading stuff in your personal folders, like documents and pictures, will be moved from your home directory into the OneDrive folder. And then you arrived at the desktop. Going into the settings or on real hardware, there might be some driver updates waiting and not set up, which is not a problem on Linux. Watch out for the graphics driver updating during OOBE, might cause freezes. I read the April update causes issues, might want to be cautious with that. On VirtualBox, go to Devices, insert Guest Additions, then locate it in the VM and run it. This will install VirtualBox kernel drivers, after which you have to restart. Make sure you enable 3D acceleration and have enough virtual memory. This enables file sharing between the guest and host and screen resizing. This also enables graphical acceleration and effects, as you can see with rounded window corners and a bit of blur. I would usually pick the dark theme here, but Windows needs to be activated for customization. If you dual boot Windows and Linux and you install Windows after, the computer will boot straight into Windows. Microsoft has a monopoly on personal computers, and why would you use anything other than the latest edition of Windows? To get access to Linux back, better hope you are using UEFI, as then the entry for Linux should still be there in the boot menu. To recover grab, you can try going to a Ubuntu Live environment and using boot repair, though in the end it's just better to have installed Linux after Windows. Now, to be honest, after going through the Linux installation for this video, I quickly hopped over to Windows for a clip, only to find that Windows is completely broken here. I couldn't even reinstall it. Now, I did warn of the April update, but did I maybe mess something up while managing the partitions and installing the distros beside it? Another warning to be careful with disk management. The crash error I got on Windows 11 had the code of 69, so that's nice at least, I guess. Hey, this is me. After I recorded it at the first place, I managed to reinstall Windows after I did the Ubuntu boot repair and installed Windows into a blank unallocated space. So, wow, I'm not sure what happened there, but there we go. So that was me installing operating systems. Hope it could be of any use. The conclusion I have from this is that Linux is better to set up. You have live environments, the installation is simple, and the system and the drivers are just set up out of the box. So I'll finally end here. If you enjoyed, you can perhaps like and subscribe for more such videos, and until next time, see ya!